The Forbidden City, home to China's last great regents. Almost 1,000 opulent buildings, spanning 72 hectares of central Beijing. It's the largest palace complex in the world. For centuries, it was the most exclusive and mysterious address in the empire. But the gates were privately opened to a select few, including those from Europe, whose influence helped to shape the China we know today. As imperial rule reached its final chapter, the fate of the palace and its last emperor hung in the balance. A fate that would be determined by a new China. The Forbidden City was reborn and open to all. The Forbidden City was the center of the Chinese Empire for almost 500 years. Sat in the heart of Beijing, its 8-meter-high perimeter walls kept it hidden and out of bounds to all but a few. It was an enigmatic city within a city, controlled by one man, the emperor. No one could enter or leave without his permission. Behind the walls was a bustling community, brimming with life and drama. All kept a well-guarded secret from those on the outside. But the Forbidden City wasn't completely off-limits. Emperors regularly opened the palace gates, allowing the flow of ideas and influence from the greatest minds in China. The year 1601, however, would mark a turning point, when visitors to the palace started to arrive from further afield. The reigning emperor, Wan Li, extended an invite to an Italian named Matteo Ricci. He was the first European to ever enter the palace. This was a pivotal moment. Floodgates to a European influence that would transform China. The 15th and 16th centuries were the age of discovery. Europeans took to the seas, setting up trade routes to feed their taste for the exotic. And along these new routes came more than 1,000 Jesuit missionaries, an order of Catholic men known for their intelligence and scientific knowledge. Ricci was one of the first to arrive on Chinese soil. He had spent almost 2 decades immersed in the culture of his new home and became established in high Chinese society, where he was respected for his brilliant mind. But Ricci knew that if Christianity was to take hold in China, he had to convert its most influential man. He made it his goal to meet with the emperor. He showered the Forbidden City with gifts from Europe, hoping for an invite to the palace in return. Ricci's plan worked. The emperor became fascinated by one of his gifts, a European clock unlike anything produced in China at the time. It was the birth of a new hobby for Wan Li, who began collecting as many clocks as he could lay his hands on. He ordered for Ricci to stay in Beijing, normally off-limits to Westerners, so that he could maintain his new collection. But over the 10 years that he visited the Forbidden City, Matteo Ricci would never meet the emperor in person. Wan Li had been on strike for years, alienated from his imperial role. In spite of this, the two men established a distant relationship. And Ricci was rewarded for his service to the palace, given permission to build Beijing's first Catholic church. From then on, he dedicated his life to the people, teaching them both science and religion. When Ricci died in 1610, he became the first European to be buried in China's capital. His relationship with Wan Li was the first of its kind, a defining encounter between Chinese and European civilizations. It paved the way to what would become a tradition of Western presence and influence in the Forbidden City. China had its own religion before Westerners brought Christianity to its shores. Confucianism and Taoism had run through the core of the nation for 2,000 years. More than just religions, they were a way of life. The royal establishment was based on the Confucian concepts of status and power, holding the emperors at the top of a strict and well-established hierarchy. For the next 5 centuries, missionaries would attempt to convert various ruling emperors to no avail. Christianity was too foreign for the Chinese and incompatible with their existing beliefs. Allowing this new religion to take hold would threaten the stability of the nation. Despite this, missionaries continued to arrive from all over Europe. Using their scientific knowledge as bait before attempting to convert the influential. In 1644, the Ming Empire was overthrown, clearing the way for the new Qing dynasty. Its leaders continued to invite Europeans into the Forbidden City, and it remained a center of cultural exchange. Emperor Kangxi, the second emperor to rule the new Qing Empire, took charge in 1661 and led China for 61 years. He would be its longest reigning regent and one of its most influential, steering the nation through some of its most prosperous years. Kangxi had a thirst for knowledge unrivaled by other leaders, and took full advantage of the growing European missionary population in Beijing. But he had no interest in their religion. He wanted them for their scientific expertise. He formed a council of the most educated Europeans in China, a tradition that would continue in the Qing court for decades. As a result, the empire entered a golden age of technology. Under Kangxi's rule, the nation became one of the most economically advanced in the world. He opened his palace and his country to European visitors. And in return, they helped him to modernize China. With this, Kangxi's empire grew in strength and stature. Centuries of battling with neighboring nations had created a well-established obsession amongst China's leaders of mapping the ever-changing boundaries of their kingdoms. Kangxi's new knowledge of techniques from Europe inspired the emperor to replot the maps of the day. He brought together a Sino-European team to chart the entire Qing Empire. A project that would span over a decade. Ancient Chinese methods were combined with new Western technologies. Together, they created groundbreaking maps, unrivaled by any other nation. Western influence had bolstered China during some of its most prosperous years. But the missionaries had failed in their attempts to convert its emperors to Christianity. Buddhism from India had a different fate. It had gained traction over a long 2,000-year history and was absorbed into Chinese culture, more compatible with the Confucian and Taoist values at the core of the nation. But it was these values that would eventually contribute to the downfall of imperial rule. China had been exposed to Western technologies for 300 years, but it had failed to fully embrace modernization. Emperors viewed the progress of mankind with fascination. Curious new items from the West began to appear at the palaces. The royal collections became packed with the fruits of European industrialization. But Qing leaders missed the opportunity to use and develop the technology. China was too slow in adapting to a rapidly globalizing world. A strong economy had fueled a population explosion, causing a strain on China's resources. And the Qing dynasty acted to prevent the unpopular spread of European influence across the empire. In the mid-19th century, trade restrictions were brought in, much to the frustration of those who had established roots with the resource-rich nation. In response, foreign forces used their new technologies to create naval and land forces that could not be defeated. The Opium Wars that followed saw a humiliating defeat for China, as its trade routes were reopened by force. There was little the Qing Empire's last rulers could do. Its weakness had been exposed, and the dynasty began to lose control of its furthest reaches. France took Southeast Asia. Japan took Taiwan, and European nations had already begun setting up bases all along China's coast. The foreigners began to hold more power than China's government, and the authority of imperial rule was wavering. As discontent spread through the country like a plague, powerful rebel leaders started to emerge, offering the impoverished growing population an alternative to the monarchs who were struggling to keep a grip on their empire. An uprising in 1911 was the nail in the coffin. The armed rebellion took hold of Beijing, leading to the abdication of the last emperor in 1912, a 6-year-old boy named Pu Yi. The Qing dynasty had fallen, ending thousands of years of imperial rule. A new Republican era had begun, but it would be far from smooth sailing. Power-hungry revolutionary leaders and politicians fought among themselves for control over the new nation. Meanwhile, a young Pu Yi and his family remained imprisoned in the Forbidden City. Yuan Shikai, once an official of the royal court, became the self-appointed president of the new republic government in 1913. Pu Yi was allowed to keep his title of emperor and to stay in the inner court of the palace, attended by courtiers and eunuchs, in a mock imperial state. The outer court of the Forbidden City was in political chaos, occupied by a volatile new government. Whilst the inner court remained as a sanctuary for Pu Yi and his family. But he was effectively a prisoner, and passed his days immersed in his studies. Pu Yi continued the Qing tradition of employing a Western tutor. The man who took up the job was Reginald Fleming Johnston, a Scotsman who was the first foreign man allowed entry to the inner court of the Forbidden City. He had a profound effect on Pu Yi, who adopted the English name of Henry, cut off his long Manchu plait, and became more Western in his ways. The new Republic government remained unstable. Pu Yi became nervous that his safety within the now decaying palace was at risk. Fleming wrote of the turbulent times.
Amid all the familiar scenes of turmoil, disruption, banditry, famine, and civil war, the plot stratagems of Parliament and wily politicians, the truculence of military adventures and the antics of hot-headed students, there was one little stronghold in the midst of the capital, which seemed to maintain itself as a haunt of ancient peace. That home of stately decorum and tranquility was surrounded by battlemented walls and imposing gateways that symbolized the spirit of old China.
With the mounting chaos, Pu Yi began planning for his future. Committed a crime that would leave a stain on his name for decades to come. The ex-emperor had long suspected the palace eunuchs of helping themselves to royal treasures. When he announced that an inventory would be taken of the remaining collection, the palace was sent into panic. The crimes of many dishonest eunuchs were about to be exposed. In 1923, the largest ceremonial hall in the palace went up in flames as the eunuchs used arson to cover their tracks. fewer than 400 items were salvaged. And a furious Puyi ordered the remaining 1,000 eunuchs to leave the Forbidden City, bringing an end to a 2,000-year tradition. Things were becoming desperate for Puyi, who knew that his days in the palace were numbered. The fire had aroused suspicion outside the palace walls, and the public were beginning to turn on him. With a newfound knowledge of the state of the imperial treasures, he and his brother followed the lead of the light-fingered eunuchs and arranged for 2,000 artifacts to be taken from the Forbidden City. They were spirited away to the Japanese embassy in the nearby city of Tianjin in preparation for his new life outside of the palace walls. In 1924, the political chaos reached a head. A coup by warlord Fun Wuxiang saw the imperial household swiftly evicted under guard. Puyi joined his plundered treasures in Tianjin, and the new government of the Republic of China took ownership of the Forbidden City and everything left inside. But they had no idea what was contained within the palace walls. Theft and fire had claimed thousands of treasures, but this had hardly made a dent in the palace's huge hoard. It was still bursting with priceless artifacts. A record was needed of the hundreds of years of imperial collection. Only the most trusted men were tasked with the job. Special anti-theft uniforms and constant supervision were extra safeguards. Work was carried out during the depths of winter, in often freezing conditions. The team bore the weight of huge responsibility. They were the first to encounter what was left of China's imperial heritage, and their records were the vital first step in preserving it. Within 9 months, the committee had created a catalogue. It was 28 volumes long and contained over 1 million treasures. The inventory had not only uncovered the extent of the imperial collection, but also a hidden royal secret. Amongst the towers of paperwork, evidence was discovered of a plot to reinstate Puyi to the throne. It seemed that the ex-emperor still had a thirst for power and wanted to return to the palace, this time to rule the country. With the royal family still a threat, the new government decided on a plan to transform the Forbidden City into a museum. If there was no palace to return to, Puyi would struggle to reinstate a monarchy. On October the 10th, 1925, the Palace Museum was officially established. It was inspired by the Louvre in Paris. The creation of this museum rooted out the possibility of China reverting to royal leadership. A band of the most trusted officials were gathered to organize and protect the treasures of the Forbidden City. But no one could have predicted the lengths these men would have to go to in safeguarding one of the largest royal collections in the world. In 1931, the Japanese invaded northeast China, declaring it the independent nation of Manchukuo and appointing Puyi as the emperor. But it was simply a puppet state of Japan, and Puyi had betrayed the people of China, those he was once destined to lead. Beijing was in immediate danger, and concern was growing for the fate of the palace treasures. If the Japanese invaded the capital and broke into the Forbidden City, the treasures wouldn't stand a chance. In 1933, an improbable scheme was devised to keep them safe. Crates containing over 1 million pieces of the royal collection were to be moved thousands of kilometers. It would be the largest migration of treasures the world has ever seen.
It was very quiet. No sound could be heard except for the sound of the cars. No one spoke, and no one sang. It was a desolate scene. No one knew when the national treasures would be brought back.
Military escort. Soldiers armed with guns rode on the roof of the train that carried 13,000 crates from the Forbidden City to safety in Nanjing. As the Japanese moved south, so did the treasures. Japanese did reach Beijing and entered the Forbidden City, it was empty. The palace's treasures had been saved, but there was no respite. Japanese invasion began in 1937. The pieces had to be moved yet again, out of the reach of enemy bombers. This time, they were to go further into China's interior. The treasures were carried along 3 major routes to the southwest provinces of Guizhou and Sichuan. Over the next 8 years, the guardians of the museum crates were like refugees. On the run from the destruction of war, they dodged the Japanese forces advancing across the nation. The treasures had to be moved at a moment's notice and stored anywhere that could be found, often in temples, caves, and tunnels. The museum was on the road for 12 years, and so too were the men employed to protect it. They were dedicated to their mission, sacrificing over a decade of their lives to the safety of the treasures they were employed to guard. Much of their commitment and bravery went unknown to the public. And miraculously, nothing was lost or damaged. When the Japanese surrendered at the end of the war in 1945, the collection and its guardians could finally stop hiding. But the nation was still in turmoil. Manchukuo had dissolved around Pune, and he was caught trying to flee the country by Soviet troops. He was kept captive in Siberia for the next 5 years. Full-scale civil war had now broken out. The 2-decade-long tensions between the Republic government and the Communist Army had come to a head. The Japanese invasion had pushed the increasingly corrupt ruling government into southwest China, and the communists, who had controlled much of the hinterland to the north, swept down through the fragile nation. The Republic government were forced to flee the mainland to safety in Taiwan, taking with them the most valued 3,000 crates of palace treasures. But communism took hold and grew in power. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was officially established, with Chairman Mao Zedong as its leader. Those in exile in Taiwan and the treasures they took with them would never return to the mainland. Stability was finally restored. In 1950, more than a decade after their removal, and having traveled thousands of kilometers across the breadth of China, the crates began to arrive back in Beijing. All but those taken to Taiwan eventually returned to their home in the Palace Museum. But the years hadn't been kind. Decades of war and political turmoil had led to the palace's neglect. Bringing it back to its former glory would be a monumental undertaking. But luckily, the new government had made this a priority. They were determined to make the Palace Museum the greatest treasure house of art in China. The remaining collections of the Palace Museum were reassembled and catalogued. The new Communist Party were being seen to safeguard the nation's cultural heritage. A diplomatic move following such political upheaval. The royal collection was now a little lighter, thanks to years of theft under imperial rule and the loss of those taken to Taiwan. So the quest began to bring the treasures home. Many hadn't made it far, turning up in antique shops just outside the palace. Lost treasures were found and brought home. Some appeared in foreign collections thousands of kilometers away. Almost 240,000 items have also been added to the collection over the past 50 years. After being held captive by the Soviets and almost a decade in a new government correctional facility, Pu Yi was accepted back by China as a loyal citizen and was officially pardoned for his dealings with the Japanese. Almost 40 years after he was evicted from the palace, Pu Yi was invited to visit his former home.
To my surprise, the old and dilapidated scene at the time when I left the Imperial Palace was nowhere to be found. Every place looked brand new. In the Imperial Garden, I saw some kids playing in the sun. I saw some old men sipping and tasting tea in the tea house. I smelled the fragrance given off by ancient cypresses. I felt that the sunshine here has become brighter than before. I believe that the Imperial Palace has also gained a new life.
Pu Yi had witnessed a transformation. The Imperial Palace was now an established museum. And it would continue to grow over the coming years. The collection expanded and displays improved. But maintaining 72 hectares of decaying buildings and the works of art contained within them was an ongoing battle. And one that was being lost. As the Palace Museum celebrated its 80th birthday in 2004, a project began that promised to restore its many treasures and bring its almost 1,000 buildings back to the glory of Imperial China's zenith. Traditional methods were used across the project, some hundreds of years old. Anti-rot paste was applied to timber throughout the complex. A secret formula containing fermented pig's blood and flour, passed down the generations since the early Qing dynasty. It was combined with strong natural fibers and applied to the countless wooden surfaces. Million sheets of gold foil were used to painstakingly re-gild the many hundreds of buildings. Westerners were once again invited back to the palace, this time bringing with them their restoration expertise. The work would take 19 years and cost an estimated 2 billion yuan. As the Forbidden City approaches its 600th year and the restoration comes close to completion, the true splendor of China's imperial past can now be seen. It has matured into a global treasure, a World Heritage Site, opening its gates to 80,000 visitors a day. Once thought to be the center of the world, home to the divine ruler on earth. A mysterious and exclusive enigma. As its gates were opened to foreign influence, Imperial China transformed. But then faded as it failed to adapt to a changing world. The palace was also given a new identity. Transformed from a secretive imperial stronghold to the most visited museum in the world. Over 6 centuries, the Forbidden City was at the heart of the nation's dramas. Witnessed its most profound changes. Symbolic of the strength and endurance of the nation. Today, it stands as a Chinese icon.